let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be doing our wrap up, our final look at the special topic of signal detection. So we introduced this idea last class, kind of went over the basics of it. And that was signal detection part one. And now we're getting real, signal detection part two. You can tell she's super serious because she's looking right at you. But today what we're going to do is we're going to delve deeper into one of the possible applications that signal detection theory can help us understand about more complex psychological behavior. So oftentimes signal detection theory is very applied very restrictively to basic sensory procedures. Right, basic detection, thresholds. Can you see a very dim light in a dark room? Can you hear a very low volume tone play through headphones? And these are very important aspects of understanding perception and understanding the human mind, but it can be applied to just about any decision-making situation where you can either answer yes or no, and you can either be right or wrong. And that is a lot of decisions that we as humans with our human mind attempt to answer and attempt to deal with. So we're going to see that signal detection can give us insights way beyond just the idea of doing visual searches, just the idea of doing perceptual searches, it can go way beyond just detecting tones and detecting stimuli. It can actually give us a framework for understanding decisions. And then also, very importantly, as psychologists who want to have an impact in the world, understanding how we can best go about changing the world so that it's a better place for everybody involved. All right, so today we're going to have a real quick review of signal detection. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time on the real world applications and implications. So I asked you to think about how signal detection might be applied to real world scenarios. Again, any situation where you have to come up with a yes or no answer, and you can either be right or wrong, can have signal detection applied to it. And then the one that we're going to dive in deep on today, just to give you a real nice overview of how signal detection can throw light on a very complicated question, is going to be our look at sexual harassment, our look at consent, and the implications and the impact of the Me Too movement, and how that has changed things, and what signal detection can tell us about these issues when you break it down to this yes or no situation. And then we're also going to take a look at a really interesting study on power and biases in sexual interest, and just what is the impact of a power differential, having more power than somebody else. What is that impact on your perception of sexual interest? Really interesting study, has big time implications for how you go about, again, making sure that you have an impact in the world as a psychologist, and making sure that you set up situations where the most people can flourish the most and live a fruitful life. All right, so real quick overview of signal detection. So signal detection was developed to measure the sensitivity of a perceptual system. It was borrowed from engineering and used to understand the really complicated engineered mind that we have, that is being implemented in our body, in our environment. And it's the ability of an organism or organ to detect or respond to external stimuli. This is what it originally was developed to do. It gave you a measure that is called sensitivity. It is labeled D prime. And that sensitivity is just defined as the distance between the signal and noise distribution, and the signal and noise distribution, and the noise distribution on its own. And that is using a signal detection paradigm. And just to refresh your memory, The noise distribution, that is the representation or the distribution of evidence that is present when there is no signal present. So one of the big insights the signal detection theory gave us is that there is always noise in the system. There's always something going on that can be misinterpreted as evidence. And regardless of how much you limit that or reduce that, there's always going to be noise in the system. So we gave that example of John Cage, who went to the anechoic chamber in Berkeley, California, I believe, and was really, really excited to hear silence for the first time, to experience silence for the first time in his life, because he was very acutely aware that in the natural world, we are never in a situation where we can hear silence. So he goes into that chamber, all the external stimulation is gone, and yet he still hears a high-pitched sound and he still hears a low-pitched sound. And he was incredibly disappointed, but the engineers told him that the low-pitched sound was his blood going through his body, being pumped through his body, and the high-pitched sound was his nervous system, the sound that his nervous system was making. So even without any external stimulation, there was still noise in the system. And we went through an example of a teacher trying to determine if somebody is raising their hand to ask a question, or is it just random movements? So the random movements are going to form the noise distribution. And then that raising of a hand is the signal, but that is always added to the noise distribution. So it's not like as soon as the hand goes up, all the noise goes away and everybody stays incredibly still. That signal is always added to that noise distribution. So we have, in a classic signal detection setup, you have evidence on your x-axis, and that increases from left to right. So how much evidence is there being presented to your perceptual system? On the y-axis, we have the frequency of the impression. So how often does that level of evidence occur in the natural occurring situation? You have your noise distribution, and that is a normal distribution, meaning that that is how much evidence is present when there is no signal. So that is the high-pitched sound and the low-pitched sound when John Cage was in that anechoic chamber. That is the random movements of students when they're in the room. It's always there. That noise distribution is always there. And sometimes, very, very infrequently, you're going to have a lot of evidence that comes just from the noise distribution. So this would be an example of the student that constantly or very often lifts their hands up like this, and it looks like they're raising their hand. It looks very much like they're raising their hand, but they're not. They're not asking a question. And that doesn't occur very often. You don't have very many instances of that, and that's why it's a low frequency impression on this noise distribution curve. On the opposite end, you have very low amounts of evidence that are given by the noise distribution. And an example of this would be the child that sits there in class like a statue. And there are very few of those children. So again, that amount of noise, that amount of evidence in the noise distribution also doesn't occur very often. But more likely, more frequently, more commonly, you have a middle amount of that evidence from the noise distribution. And you can think of these as all the children that kind of have some motion, but not too much motion. And this entire distribution is easiest to think of if you think of it as people stacked on top of people. So literally a situation like this, and that's where you get the frequency curves. So most instances are going to be in the middle of that noise distribution or very close to the middle, but very rarely you'll get very low amounts of evidence from the noise distribution, or you'll get very high amounts of evidence from the noise distribution. And then a key concept is that the signal plus noise distribution is the noise distribution, literally it's the noise distribution plus the signal. So once that hand goes up, it doesn't erase the noise distribution. We don't get rid of the noise distribution. That signal of that one student with their hand up gets added to the noise distribution. So for each of these students here, each of these smiley faces, when they raise their hand, right, individually, when they raise their hand, whatever movement they're doing, that raising of the hand gets added to that movement. So the signal plus noise distribution reflects that in the sense that it's just the exact same amount of noise, but now with a signal added to it. So that signal increases the amount of evidence. It's evidence that a signal is actually occurring, and it moves the entire distribution. So once again, we have very high levels of evidence that occur very infrequently when the signal is present. We have very low levels of evidence that occur infrequently when the signal is present. And we have that middle amount of evidence that occurs very frequently when that noise is present. All right, and then the sensitivity is measured by the distance between the peaks. And the last piece of this is that you need to make a decision as to whether or not, in this case, the hand is raised. So you need to make a decision as to whether or not the signal is present. So depending upon the situation, and we'll see how important this becomes today, depending upon the situation, you choose a specific criterion. And above that, any evidence that occurs that is above that criterion, you say, yes, the signal is there. Any evidence that occurs that is below that criterion, you say, no, the signal is not present. And this leads to 4 possible outcomes for this decision. You can, we'll first check off, or we'll take a look at the noise distribution and when you say no. So in the noise distribution, we have evidence that comes in above criterion. So evidence that is larger than or higher than the criterion. And in that case, you're going to say, yes, a signal is there, but the signal is not actually there. A little bit too much red on that one. You're going to say, yes, the signal is there when the signal isn't actually there. And then for the majority of the noise distribution in this case, you're going to say, no, the signal is not there, and you're going to be correct. So the times when you say, no, the signal is not there, because the amount of evidence, that green area, the amount of evidence is below your criterion, those are called correct rejections. You have correctly rejected the idea that a signal is present. You said, no, it's just noise. And then occasionally, in the red area there, when there is no signal and it's just noise, you're going to say, yes, I hear something, or yes, I perceive something. You're going to be that teacher that calls on a student and says, yes, Julie, you have a question. And Julie's going to say, no, ma'am, I don't have a question. I'm sorry, that's a false alarm. So those are the false alarms when you say, yes, the signal is there, but in reality, the signal is not there. So those are the 2 possible outcomes when there's no signal. On the other hand, sometimes there is a signal, and that's the distribution for the signal. And you can either say, yes, there is a signal, or no, there is not a signal. And you will say it depending upon whether the signal plus noise distribution falls above the criterion or below. So when it falls above the criterion, you're going to say yes, and that's that area right there. And those are called hits. So that is when the signal is present, and you say, yes, I detect a signal. So in that classroom example, a child puts their hand up, and the teacher goes, George, you have a question? And George is like, yes, I do have a question. Thank you for noticing. Thanks for the hit. So that's when the signal is present and you say yes. However, occasionally you can see there the signal is present, but you say no. And those are incorrect. And those are misses. So this in the classroom example would be when a child has their hand up and the teacher doesn't notice. Or the teacher thinks that they're maybe fixing their hair or scratching their temple or doing something else with their hand. Maybe she thinks that they're stretching. So in this case, they wouldn't get called upon, and that would be a miss. The signal was there, but the person making the decision said, no, I don't see the signal. That's a miss. So those are the 4 possible outcomes. And you can take a look at how we deal with those 4 possible outcomes and what their implications are on where our sensitivity is. So those 4 possible outcomes tell us exactly where the 2 distributions are, the noise distribution and the signal plus noise distribution. That also lets you know where your criteria is in terms of evidence on the curve. And that allows us to calculate the sensitivity, the distance between the peaks. And you can see that this intuitively makes sense when you take a look at what happens when you increase the sensitivity. So if you were to increase the sensitivity, just as a sort of English language layperson understanding, if you told somebody, oh, I'm trying to detect whether students have their hands raised in my class. So I went to this course on hand raising sensitivity training, and my sensitivity to hands up in the class has gone up. What that person is going to think is that you've gotten better at recognizing when a hand is up. And what that means is that you've gotten better at saying, yes, there's a hand up when the hand is up. And you've gotten better at saying, no, there's no hand up when there is no hand up. Basically, the only way that happens is in this situation, where those two curves are spread farther apart. And if the distance between the tips of those curves, the distance between the tops of those curves is a measure of sensitivity, you can see that it makes intuitive sense. You pull the curves apart, you get better at having hits, you get better at correct rejections, you lower the amount of false alarms, you lower the amount of misses. And that is exactly what we intuitively think we mean when we say, oh yeah, we've increased our sensitivity. We've gotten better at doing this perception. And then the other thing that you can do, if you can't increase your sensitivity, one of the other things that you can do to make your perceptual system the best fit to a particular situation is you can move your criteria. And we're going to see how this can affect questions of sexual harassment, questions of sexual assault, and workplace or non-workplace intimate relations. Because what you can do is you cannot just get better, right? You can't increase your hits, increase your correct rejections, reduce your false alarms, and reduce your misses without increasing your sensitivity. But what you can do is you can do a trade-off. And you can say in a situation, for example, you can say that, well, you know what, false alarms really aren't that problematic in this particular situation. But misses are truly problematic. So if you are a person that is doing cancer detection, right? False alarms, you tell somebody, hey, you know what, your test came back positive. We want to run some more extensive tests. False alarms are not that detrimental to the person's health. They're going to have anxiety until they get that second test. The second test is going to come back. They're going to get cleared. Their lives are not going to be massively impacted. But misses are huge, right? If you give a person a test and you say, hey, you know what, you don't have any cancer, when in fact they do, that's a miss, that's going to be massively detrimental. So what you would want to do if you can't increase the sensitivity of your test, you're going to want to move your criterion back and say, all right, in this situation, because of the cost of a miss, we're going to increase our false alarms so that we can reduce our misses. On the other hand, if the false alarms are causing a lot of impact, you go the opposite direction. And you'll say, all right, I'm going to move my criterion higher so that the false alarms, me saying, yes, there is a signal, when there is no signal, is reduced, and the misses are increased. And that is just a trade-off that you can't get around as long as the sensitivity remains the same. All right, so that was our quick recap of signal detection theory so that we can go forward and now have this look at the real world applications and implications. And again, last time I mentioned a few just to kind of get your minds thinking about the possibilities. So this really can be applied to very many scenarios that you will have been in multiple times in your life. So coming up for many of you applying to grad school, a decision many of you made applying to IUSB, right? Applying to IUSB was a yes or no decision. And you clearly are the students that had hits. So you clearly are the students that said, yes, I'm going to apply to IUSB. And that was the correct decision because you got into IUSB. There are students that applied to IUSB and did not get into IUSB. Those are the misses. There are students that did not apply and would have gotten it. Those are the misses. The ones that did apply but did not get in, those are the false alarms. And then the ones that decided, hey, you know what, I'm not going to get in, I'm not going to apply. Those are the correct rejections. So this has a lot of importance, especially in grad school applications where some of them cost money. So you can't financially just go through 100 applications. And they take time and they're very extensive. And there may be an interview process as well. So you have to start making decisions about, do I apply here or do I not apply here? And that's a signal detection decision. For those of you that are going to graduate and go directly into the workforce, once again, whoops. Once again, a signal detection theory question: do I apply for this job? Put in the effort, put in the resources. What's the cost of a false alarm? Right? What is the cost of applying to a job, going to the interview, and then not getting it? What is the cost of not applying to a job, but then I would have gotten it if I had gone to the application? So that's a miss. So what's the cost of the false alarms versus the cost of the misses? And you move your criteria around in terms of how much of a fit do you need in that job description to your skills before you pull the trigger and apply for a particular job. And then we gave another couple of examples, just kind of indicate how the situation changes where your criteria is. So if you're in a social situation, or if you're just walking down the street and you see somebody waving, you might decide that they're waving at you and wave back. And if they're waving at you and you wave back, that's a hit. There was a signal and it was a hit. If they weren't waving at you, that's noise distribution. You wave back, that's a false alarm. And if they were waving at you, but you don't wave back, that's a miss. And then if they're not waving and you don't wave, that's a correct rejection. And the cost of a false alarm in a social situation of waving to somebody when they're not waving at you, and the cost of a miss where you say that somebody isn't waving when they're actually waving, is much different in a social situation than in a search and rescue situation. So in a search and rescue situation, if you at all think that somebody is waving at you, trying to get your attention, you need to check that out. And if it comes to the fact where this person is like, oh no, I'm not actually the group of campers that you're looking for. I was just doing my morning stretches. I really hope you find those campers. That's not going to be a huge detriment. That's not going to be a huge cost. But missing somebody who is waiting for help on a search and rescue, that has massive cost. And all of that kind of sets us up now for our look at when do you decide to make sexual advances? And what I mean by sexual advances is any sort of suggestion or proposal of an amorous relation. So making a pass at, coming on to, making advances to, hit on, to make a play for. This is basically any sort of initiation or escalation of an intimate relationship. So this will apply to any stage of this kind of decision making that you do, from the very beginning of trying to initiate a possible intimate relation all the way up to furthering and escalating that relationship. And basically, to take a look at this, what we're going to do is we are going to set up this situation, again, as a signal detection situation, as a signal detection theory. So what you're trying to do in this situation, if you're the one that needs to make the decision, if you're the one that sees an individual and you think to yourself, should I, yes, make advances towards this person? Or should I, no, don't make advances towards this person? What you're really asking, and let's say just for the sake of argument so that we don't massively complicate this, let's say that you are interested in that other person. So you're interested in the other person, and now the question becomes, do you make an advance or do you not make an advance? And if that person is not interested, right, so they do not want you to make an advance, and they are not open to that possibility at this time, then if you get evidence from whatever evidence you're picking up in this social situation, from whatever your perceptual system is picking up, if you get evidence from them and you look at them and you say, you know what, they're not interested, so I'm not going to do anything today. You know, I'll maybe another day, but definitely I'm going to say no, don't make advances to today. That's going to be a correct rejection. They're not interested, you identify that and you don't do anything. that's a correct rejection. That typically is a totally fine outcome. If we take a look at the situation where they are interested, and you take a look at them and you say, you know what, there is evidence, and this is gonna be, I'm gonna try to keep this as dry as possible. Don't for a second think that this is how people actually make this decision. Nobody's sitting there going, you know what, there is evidence that this person is interested in possible sexual advances for myself. So I am going to approach them because their evidence went higher than my criterion. So here we go. I doubt nobody ever talks like that to their friends afterwards. It's like, oh, did you ask that? You asked that person out. It's like, oh, you should have seen that evidence was way beyond my criterion. So yeah, I went up there. Did they say yes? Of course they said yes, because I perceived evidence that they were interested. They actually were interested. So I went up, I made advances to, and that was a hit. And that is the beginning of a intimate relationship, right? Possible beginning, that's the first stage. And again, this is a good outcome for everybody. The outcomes that are not welcome. One of them is the misses. So somebody is there and they are hoping that you will approach them, right? And they are doing whatever is socially acceptable to indicate, to provide evidence for, yes, I am approachable. Yes, I am interested. They are putting out that evidence. And for whatever reason, that evidence does not pass your criterion. So they're at a party and they're like, okay, I really hope they come up and talk to me soon. You know, I'm kind of standing here giving them my most come up and talk to me evidence that I possibly can. And the other person just walks right on by. That's a miss. So that is not a great situation, but typically more or less damaging, especially with multiple cases, although we'll see maybe not exactly, but especially in multiple cases, than the false alarms. And the false alarms is when you look at somebody and you say, yes, they want me to approach them. Yes, they are open. They are interested to my advances. You make those advances, but they're actually not interested. And for whatever reason, the evidence that they were providing passed that criterion, passed your criterion. And in this case, you go up to them. And again, as we're going to see, depending upon the situation, that has a certain cost to it. Sometimes it's just social embarrassment. Sometimes it's just the fact that you will then get rejected. But other times it's very detrimental, not just to you, but also to the person that is being approached. All right, so what we're gonna take a look at right now is ideas about this criterion and just kind of like, what does psychology say about who's making this decision and how do they set this criterion, especially in our culture here. Now, one of the things that I will preface this discussion by saying is that we're going to go and discuss heterosexual relationships and heterosexual advances for the remainder of this discussion, simply because there's two reasons for that. Number one, there's more research that you can pull from in terms of heterosexual interactions, but also there's more of a there's more of a difference between the individuals in a heterosexual interaction than there are individuals in a homosexual reaction. So when you have a male and a female that are interacting, that's very, very much more different than if a female and a female are interacting or a male and a male are interacting. So we're going to stick with the heterosexual relation and basically await psychology to do some more research and maybe apply this in a future discussion to non-heterosexual relationships. All right, so what research are we going to draw on? Well, we're going to go to this study in the Journal of Family Issues, Waiting to be Asked, Gender Power and Relationship Progression Among Cohabiting Couples. So this was done by Sassier and Miller back in 2011. And what they did is they limited it to cohabiting couples. So this is a particular segment of the population. It might not be as generalizable, but I think it does shed a lot of light on how these decisions are made. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is how they became a couple. So one of the things that they asked were, how did they become a couple? And one of the big results was that although only 11 couples in our sample described a formal date as the beginning of the relationship, 10 of these couples attributed the initiation of that relationship to the man. So 10 out of 11 of these couples, it was the man who initiated the relationship. What that means is that it was the male that was in that signal detection paradigm, looking at the evidence, setting their criterion and going, okay, am I getting noise only with no signal, or am I getting a signal plus a noise? And then we also have the finding that 7 couples described knowing they were in a romantic relationship because of a sign, a first kiss or more, leaving flowers in a locker, or the presentation of chocolates. In 6 of these 7 couples, men were the instigators of these direct but nonverbal signifiers. Other men expressed their intention, their interest in a romantic relationship. So out of these 7 couples that actually had a nonverbal signifier, 6 out of those 7 were again males. 6 out of those 7 couples were males who made the decision. There's interest. There's enough evidence for me to decide, yes, this person is interested. So let me make a nonverbal signifier. Let me get some chocolates. Let me get some flowers. And then also it goes, other men express their interest in a romantic relationship. Basically, let me express my interest. Hey, I've had a crush on you for a while. Hey, I'm very interested in pursuing a relationship. And then women, in contrast, were far more likely to rely on indirect strategies to transition friendship into romance. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but the last one I want to mention, and this one just kind of stuck out to me because this is one of the only times where there was an emotional description to the data collection process. But it goes, several respondents revealed that women who pursued the first date or first sexual encounters with partners were, in the words of one rueful woman, shot down. So that is the first time anybody has been described with any information. And I just found it very interesting that it was a rueful woman who got shot down. So there's some findings from this study. What does that mean in terms of signal detection theory? Let's take a look. So in this case, we have the signal detection set up here. We have the criterion that we're going to be looking at, and we're going to take a look at who is making the decision, who is looking at these distributions and this criterion, whose mind is analyzing this in order to make the decision. And the research is pretty clear that, at least in our society, it's the male. The male is typically the one that needs to make this decision. It's typically the one that this falls to in order to make the decision. So it's the male that has the responsibility, I guess, in our society of making that decision. So that goes for making advances to or not making advances to. So 10 out of 11 males were the ones that asked the person out on their first date. It also goes to other ideas like giving direct signifiers versus not giving direct signifiers. So do I buy chocolates or do I not buy chocolates? Do I send flowers or do I not send flowers? And again, you have, I send flowers and they are interested, that would be a hit. I send flowers and they're not interested, that would be a false alarm. I did not send flowers and they are not interested, that's a correct rejection. I did not send flowers, but they actually were interested, that would be a miss. So we have all of these kinds of decisions that are being, at least again in our society, the responsibility of the male, although we'll talk about that in a little bit. And again, whether you initiate the relationship, whether you don't initiate the relationship, that seems to be on the shoulders and the responsibility of the man. All right, so that's what males are doing in these relationships. They're the ones that are looking at the distributions, setting their criterion, and then making the decision. That's not to say that women are not involved at all. And what this research shows, and again, we'll take a look at this quote right here, is that women, in contrast, were far more likely to rely on indirect strategies to transition friendship into romance. And these indirect strategies, that's basically just another way of saying evidence. So when you take a look at this signal detection theory setup, the males are the ones that are making the decision. They're the ones that are making the decision of whether to initiate the relationship or not initiate the relationship. And what the women are doing is they are providing the evidence. So women, at least in our society, are the ones that are responsible for providing evidence or basically indicating when they are interested through these nonverbal signifiers. So this is not a case where they indicate that they are interested by giving chocolates. That's a direct signifier, or indicate through direct verbal means. In our society, at least in this study, they indicated through nonverbal, non-direct indicators, AKA they give evidence. All right, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to take this situation right here, and we're going to move it to the side a little bit, just so that we got a little bit more space. So one of the things that this does, one of the things that providing additional evidence does, and actually I'm going to back up just real quick. So you can see here, when there is not a lot of evidence compared to the noise, when the signal plus noise distribution is very close to the noise, basically the criterion that you set is going to have a lot of false alarms. It's going to have a lot of misses. It's going to have a lot of situations where the decision is incorrect. One way to get around that, one way to alleviate that problem, is to just provide more evidence. And if you can provide more evidence, notice that the false alarms in this case don't change, but the misses decrease. And we can drag that over there a little bit more. If you can provide even greater evidence, then the misses will completely go away. And if you can find yourself in this situation, this kind of like idealized situation, well, then what a decision maker will do is they will no longer leave their false alarms there. And what they will do is they will say, all right, well, I'm getting a lot of false alarms compared to my correct rejections. I'm not getting a lot of misses. The misses technically are still there, but you can see that the misses are almost completely gone. So because I'm not missing anything, but I'm getting a lot of false alarms, what I can do is I can increase my criterion and thereby eliminate the false alarms. So I'm not approaching people that are not interested. I'm not giving attention where attention might be poorly received. But still, I'm getting a lot of hits. I'm getting a lot of correct rejections because the evidence has been increased. The amount of evidence has been increased, and that pushes the signal plus noise distribution away from just the noise distribution on its own. And that would lead to this particular situation. All right, so the other one that I mentioned that I was going to return to was this one here. So several respondents revealed that women who pursued the first date or first sexual encounters with partners were, in the words of one rueful woman, shot down. So in this case, we have the reverse situation where women are the ones that are now making the decision. So these are cases, again, where women are pursuing the first date. Women are pursuing the first sexual encounter. So they are now the ones that are making that yes or no decision in this particular instance. And that rueful woman who was shot down basically decided that there was interest, approached the individual, and there was no interest. And that is a false alarm. So the question then becomes, for those false alarms, why specifically were they rueful? And again, it might be biases on the authors of this paper. It might be biases in our culture, but the question that always goes through my mind is, how rueful did she need to be in order for them to put that in the paper, right? Like, how extreme was this reaction? It was enough. There was enough that they specifically said, you know what, we're going to put that word in there, rueful, So why is this the case? Well, we can again take a look at signal detection theory. And this time, it's not the male's decision to approach or not approach, or initiate or not initiate. This time, we're taking a look at when a woman is making the decision. And then again, we have that idea that there are false alarms, and these false alarms are somehow emotionally damaging. There's an emotional cost to these false alarms, or at the very least, there's a cost to the false alarm that then leads to these rueful emotions. So, what is one possibility? Well, one possibility in this situation is that there's a lot of false alarms. So, you probably are not going to be very rueful about false alarms if they happen once in a blue moon. But if they happen over and over and over again, if you are evaluating evidence and you think to yourself, yeah, that guy is really interested in me, let me buy them some chocolates, and you buy them chocolates and they're like, oh, thank you for the chocolates, but I'm not interested. And you're like, well, darn, right? That would be your reaction if it happened once. But then if it happened on the next person, well, hey, you know what? He's interested. Let me go over there and confess my interest. Hey, had a crush on you. Oh, well, that's very nice, but I'm not looking right now. Then you start getting a little more than, oh, darn, right? Then that starts to build. And if it happens 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, then all of a sudden you become rueful. So what could be going on is that the criterion that women in our society use might not be high enough. So that's one possibility, that the criterion is actually set too low, that women set the criterion too low for evidence in terms of whether they should initiate a relationship or not initiate a relationship with a particular individual. So that would lead to more false alarms. But notice it would also lead to a lot more hits as well. And again, that idea of rueful really doesn't seem to reflect the reaction that would occur if you were getting a lot of hits compared to your false alarm. So again, if for every 10 people that you approach, 9 of them say that they're interested, but 1 says that they're not, even though that's 10% of your decision, you're still getting 90% hits. So what is probably going on is something more like this. What's probably going on is something where the evidence that people are interested, the evidence that males are interested, is just not that large. It's not that pronounced. There's not a lot of evidence that a male is interested. And if you're in this situation here, where the difference between the noise distribution, they're not interested, and the signal plus noise distribution, they are interested, is so close, your sensitivity is going to have to be low. And in this case, you're going to get a lot of false alarms, but you're also going to get a lot of misses, which means that you don't have a lot of hits. And that's a possible recipe for for being rueful. So in this case, if you wanted to fix this particular situation, one thing that you could do, if you were, say, a publication that was geared towards women, right? So women's magazines, TV shows that attract a large women's audience. What you would want to do to alleviate this situation is basically increase the sensitivity. And this is where you get those articles, 17 signs that he's into you, right? So basically what they're saying is like, you are not very good at detecting evidence. So here are 17 signs that the person actually is interested in you. And what that will do is it'll separate the 2 distributions so that the decision has more hits, fewer false alarms, fewer misses, and more correct rejections. The other possibility is to go to places that appeal to males, to go to magazines, websites that have a large male audience, and basically teach them how to signal that they're interested. So these are signs that you can give that would indicate that you're interested in somebody. And again, that would increase the evidence so that these 2 curves, again, go farther apart. All right, so that was the kind of intro to this whole analysis that I wanted to go through of signal detection, to just kind of show the ins and outs of how this can be applied to navigating relationships and making that decision. Do I initiate? Do I instigate? And just kind of the roles, at least in our society, that psychologists have found are occupied by males and occupied by females. Any questions on that before we turn to more dire topic? All right. So one of the great massive cultural shifts that we had in the last, has it been like 10 years now, I think, has been the Me Too movement and just how it impacted how people think about sexual relations, how people think about intimate relations. And it had an impact. It had a zenith to the movement, and now it's sort of had somewhat less of an impact. And you can see that in this article here from Glamour. Since Me Too, how many accused Hollywood men have actually been convicted? So just kind of give you a brief history of how this all started from this article. So it goes, Me Too's explosion into mainstream all began with a simple tweet by Alyssa Milano back in 2017, with Harvey Weinstein front and center, creating a movement against male violence, harassment, and sexual abuse. She said, if all the women who have been sexually assaulted or harassed wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem, she wrote at the time. Goes on to say that immediately there was a cultural shift in how we speak about these issues at all. And there have been those who have actually been convicted. So those who have been convicted include Danny Masterson, who was found guilty on 2 counts of rape in May 2023. R. Kelly was convicted of 8 counts of sex trafficking and 1 count of racketeering. And though one of Harvey Weinstein's convictions has been overturned, his other conviction of rape and sexual assault still stands. And then they have a little bit about Bill Cosby, who was actually convicted. And I do a talk on this in one of my other courses. He got convicted on his second trial. And if you take a look at his second trial, there was actually less evidence than in his first trial. And he got convicted in his second, but not his first. And that indicates just the kind of cultural shift that this article was talking about and how we speak about these issues. So let's take a look at the signal detection side of this idea. So one of the things that a cultural shift speaks about, one of the things that they're talking about is how do people in general, how does our culture perceive these questions about sexual attention or no sexual attention, wants sexual attention, does not want sexual attention, should you give sexual attention, should you not give sexual attention? So this isn't going to be about how men perceive this, how women perceive this. This is going to be about how the public in general perceived this. And we're going to see what happened before Me Too, and we're going to see what happened after Me Too in this arena. So one of the big defenses that kept coming up when people were being accused of sexual harassment. So when powerful people like Harvey Weinstein were being accused of sexual harassment, when Bill Cosby was being accused of rape. Does anybody know one of the big sort of defenses or ways that they denied these allegations? How did they justify denying these allegations? That it was reciprocated, right? That they actually wanted it. But what if they were denying it completely? What if they were denying that they ever had a sexual encounter with this individual? So that is one way that, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, that they actually wanted it, right? Now there's whatever, they're trying to extort money, they regret their decision, but they actually wanted it at the time. What was one of the other defenses that was oftentimes given to say that this person that's saying that I had sex with them, I wouldn't ever have sex with them? What was one of the defenses or justifications for that? So one of the justifications that was thrown around a lot of times and for example, for Harvey Weinstein, is why would he sexually assault anyone when he is surrounded by willing, interested women all the time, right? So why would he sexually assault one particular person when he can have, or he has access to hundreds of willing partners? So why sexually harass any woman when they're surrounded by beautiful models all the time? So this is one of the pushbacks. This is one of the counter arguments. And in Harvey Weinstein's case, his wife. Does anybody know who his wife is? His wife is actually Georgina Chapman, and that's her right there. So the question or the pushback that he would provide, the counter argument that he would provide is, why would I sexually harass anyone when this is my wife who is my sexual partner, right? Like, why? What motivation would I possibly have? And the idea was that all of these really powerful individuals just had access. That was one of the cultural beliefs that people had. These powerful people just had access to the most beautiful women in the world. They had access to the most beautiful people in the world. So again, you would have access to these individuals, and the key here that I want to get to is that these individuals are rare. So this is Bella Hadid, and this article on the most beautiful women in the world, this was not a poll. This was a scientific calculation. So they literally went through celebrities, calculated the ratios in their faces to see who had that most perfect face, and it actually turned out to be Bella Hadid, who scored 94.35% on their golden ratio percentages. So calculating the symmetry and proportion of her facial features. So keep that in mind, 94.35%. This is the top score that they achieved. So what does this mean for the public's perception of these choices, the public's perception of whether or not to believe the victims or believe the people that were in power and made those decisions? Well, what it means is that when you are deciding whether or not to give sexual attention or not give sexual attention, what the argument was is that out of all, oh yeah, that's what I want to do, beauty. I was like, what did I change here? Okay, so one of the assumptions is that the evidence for sexual attention, part of the evidence that you need in order to give sexual attention to is beauty. So the idea is that only the most beautiful women are going to be approached by these individuals. And they have access to the most beautiful women, which are the women there. So if you put beauty in as evidence for whether or not you're going to give sexual attention to or not give sexual attention to somebody, those are the most beautiful women right there. They're the ones that score the highest. They're infrequent. That's why not everybody can get a job as a model. They're very rare. But if that is where you are getting your individuals from, if those are the only individuals that you are going to approach because you have access to those individuals, what the cultural perception is that, well, that has to be their criteria. So there are going to be a lot of misses, right? There's going to be a lot of individuals that wanted attention but didn't get attention. But most importantly, look at those correct rejections. The whole thing is correct rejection, right? There are no false alarms. There weren't anybody that was approached that said, no, I don't want to be approached. It was all correct rejections. So that was the idea before the Me Too movement, that these powerful individuals, they have access to the top of the top in terms of beauty. So they're going to have an extremely high criterion. And these other women who did not reach that criterion, they would have just been rejected. And in most cases, they would have been correct rejected. Oftentimes it would have been misses. And maybe some of those misses were rueful at the fact that they were rejected. So that's the idea that was occurring, that it was that situation. However, immediately afterwards, there was a cultural shift. So what occurred is that after woman after woman after woman after woman after woman came out against these individuals, what the public's perception changed was that they took a look at that criterion and they said, well, wait a second, there's no way that that criterion could be true, right? If all of these women are telling the truth, if there's just, example after example after example after example after example of women coming forward who are not supermodel, who are not at the top of this distribution, well, that means that the criterion can't be there. And the cultural shift basically said, what must be going on is this. So the criterion of these individuals is now actually extremely low. So these individuals that are deciding, do I approach or do I not approach? They're setting their criterion incredibly low. So they are having only some misses, but they are having a lot of false alarms. And those false alarms, those are the problematic ones. Those are the ones where you get sexual harassment, where you don't want sexual attention, but you get sexual attention. And those are the ones that, that's the cultural shift that we saw as a result of Me Too. And I was dancing around this idea and using gender language for this situation because most of the coverage in the media has been on powerful individuals, people like Harvey Weinstein, people like Puff Daddy, and I really try not to perpetuate that too much because there are other examples. So I am going to pepper this with allegedly from now on because Asia Argento, she was not convicted, but did settle out of court. So I'll just read a little bit about the situation. So she was alleged to have sexually assaulted actor that she had worked with named Jimmy Bennett. This was in 2013. If true, it would have been statutory rape, as Bennett was legally a minor under California law where this occurred. So she had sex with a minor, and it goes on August, and this was reported in the Times, I believe. Yeah, it was Times, the New York Times. And it goes on the 22nd of August, she released a statement reading, I strongly deny and oppose the contents of the, there we go. I strongly deny and oppose the contents, let me get that highlighted. I strongly deny and oppose the contents of the New York Times article dated 20th August 2018 and circulated also nationally and international news. I am deeply shocked and hurt by having read news that this is absolutely false. I have never had a sexual relationship with Bennett. However, later, she admitted in text messages to another model that she had sex with him and it felt weird. And she didn't know he was a minor until the shakedown letter. Now, this was somebody that she worked previously in another movie with when I believe he was 9. So the idea that she would not have known his age, considering the labor laws and how dicey it is and how much red tape you have to go through to make sure that children can work in the movie industry, that just doesn't seem plausible at all. So the story initially changed from I did not have sex with him at all to yes, I had sex with him, but it felt weird and I didn't know he was a minor. And then one final change that there was a sexual encounter, but she then claimed that Bennett actually sexually attacked her. And just to kind of show you the situation here, Jimmy Bennett, he went on Italian TV to basically tell his story. And he was pretty much rejected by the audience and ridiculed and mocked. And the interviewer himself expressed skepticism that it was possible for a man to be sexually assaulted by a woman. He goes, a woman's violence against a man or a boy is technically difficult to understand. Mr. Giletti said, do you understand what I mean? A man has to take an active role, even if he is subjected to it. So this is the situation that we have now for female predators. Allegedly, Asia Argento, I'll just say that into the mic one more time, allegedly. But this is the situation that we have for females that sexually assault males in our culture. And what this reflects is the idea that there are no false alarms. So in our culture, we basically have this idea that if a man is sexually assaulted, that he had to have been a willing participant. There are no instances where that would occur where there was evidence of no sexual attention. So if this is the situation that we culturally shifted to in terms of males sexually assaulting females, the situation that we currently have for female sexually assaulting males is a situation where there are no false alarms. And if that's the case, that's the only place where that can occur. And if you recall, this graph is exactly the same graph that our perception that we had of males pre-Me Too. So the idea that these powerful males could have sex with anybody that they wanted to, so there were no false alarms, that is currently the kind of cultural idea that we have around females engaging in sexual relations with males. And that, again, is hopefully something that will shift again in the coming future. All right. Last thing that we're going to talk about today, and we'll see if we can finish it up, but if not, we'll just bleed it over a bit into the next lecture. So we'll set it up at the very least. It's a study that was done on power biases and biases in sexual interest. So how does having power over somebody else impact your perception of sexual interest? So if you're the boss and you're working with a secretary or somebody that is reporting to you, how does that power change your perception of their interest in you sexually? So this was a study done by Kunstman and Maynard back in 2011. It was a staged manipulation. So subjects were brought in, and then basically they received in terms of what the situation was going on. So participants were told that they would work with a partner on a task that simulated decision-making in organizations. So they were going to work with an individual on, organizational questions, and it was going to be a simulation of this. The actual experiment, though, was about biases and sexual interest. So how did they instigate these biases? So what they did is, prior to interacting with these individuals, so they said, hey, you know what? You're going to be working with somebody for this experiment. But before you work with them, here's a 2-minute video of this individual, just to kind of familiarize yourself with who they are. So they would show them a 2-minute video, and they always chose an opposite sex partner for the video. So if you were a female participant, you would watch a male video. If you were a male participant, you would watch a female video. And then you would answer questions about that partner's sexual interest. So they would ask you, after watching that video, how open do you think they would be to engage in, a sexual relationship with you? So very, very, very importantly, they were not asking, how interested are you in the person that you're watching, right? That wasn't the question. What they were asking is, how interested do you think they are? So in that signal detection theory, are they giving you noise only, or are they giving you signal plus noise in this 2-minute video? And then the participants, they were male or female. They were placed in opposite sex groups. So once again, this was studying heterosexual relationships. This part was staged. But then the key part was that they were placed in either a power position or an equal position. So the way that they did this was basically they had a reward that they were going to give at the end of the experiment. Kind of tripping on the details here. They had a reward that they were going to give at the end of the experiment, and you either split that reward equally, or you decided how to split the reward. Okay, so they were either told, hey, we're going to have a reward at the end of the participation. It's going to be, let's, for the sake of example, $100, and your participant's going to get 50, and you're going to get 50. That's the equal position. In the power position, they were told, we're going to be splitting $100, and you're going to decide how to split that 100. So you can give it equally, 50-50. You could keep 80 for yourself, give 20 to the other individual. You're going to be the one that decides how this money is divided. All right, so power and basis and sexual interest. This was the situation, this was the setup. We had the subject sex and we had the power condition. So we had male subjects and we had female subjects, and they were in the power condition. Either it was called being the leader or being equal. So we had these four conditions. So males and females, either leaders or equals. So just the entire situation here, we had males and females, four conditions. So we had males at the leader, as the leader. So these males were watching a 2-minute video of a staged female participant when they held the power in deciding how the rewards were going to be split. We had males in an equal position. So males watching the video, but knowing that the rewards were going to be split equally among the two. We had females in the leader position, females watching a male video, knowing that the females controlled the distribution of wealth at the end of the situation or at the end of the experiment. And then we had females as equals watching the 2-minute video, knowing that the rewards were going to be split equally. After watching the 2-minute video and being informed whether or not they were going to be a leader or whether they were going to be equals, they then asked them questions about the partner's sexual interest. So again, not whether the subjects were interested in the person in the video. So they didn't ask them, oh, hey, rate how interested you would be in dating this particular individual. What they did was they rated what they thought that individual would perceive about them. So they would answer questions like, I could see this person having romantic or sexual feelings for me. So on a scale of 1 to 10, could you see this person that you just watched a video for having romantic or sexual feelings for you? And they ask them questions like, I could see this person wanting to ask me out on a date. Basically, do you perceive this person as having sexual interest in you? Based on whether you were a leader or in an equal position, based on whether you're a male or a female. So let's take a look at the results real quick, and then we're going to have the discussion next time, but I will leave you with the results. The results are very interesting, and it might be good to just ponder them for the next 48 hours. So let's take a look at the power condition first. All right, so leaders versus equal. So this is collapsed across gender. We're not looking at males versus females here. We are just looking at leaders versus equals. So if you have power over a person, does that affect your expectations of sexual interest? So once again, we have males and females. We're not interested in them right now. It's just, were you in the leader position or were you in an equal position? And they had a measure of expectation of sexual interest. Basically, they took the average of their questionnaires and they scored them. So higher values indicate higher perception of sexual interest. So the expected sexual interest from their partner in the equals condition was 2.44. I'm not sure what it was out of, probably out of 5. But the key result is not necessarily how much sexual interest that was perceived. The key result is that in the leader condition, it was more. So the exact same videotapes shown to individuals, if you told them that you have power over this individual, you perceive the person in that videotape as being more interested in you sexually than if you were an equal. And that was a significant difference. The next thing that they took a look at was, is there a difference between males and females? So do either males or females have higher expectations of sexual interest just as a baseline, right? Do they just perceive other individuals as being interested in them, regardless of what the situation is that they're in? So in this case, we're not talking about the power condition. So forget about the power condition. We're just talking about males versus females. They don't actually report the numbers for this because I think they know that people will have an implicit bias against males in this situation. But the results indicate that the expectation of sexual interest that males in general had was the exact same as the expectation of sexual interest that females had. There was no significant difference. There was no statistical difference between these two. So when you asked a male to rate, how much is this female in the video interested in dating you or interested in having a sexual relationship with you? Their numbers were the same as women had when they were judging whether or not the male was interested in them. And then the last result that I'm going to leave you with before we let you simmer on this for 48 hours was there an interaction? So was there a different story for male leaders versus female leaders? And was there a different story for male equals versus female equals? Basically what they're asking here is, does power affect males or females differently when it comes to expectations of sexual interest? Is there a difference in how males and females are affected by power in terms of how they perceive sexual interest? So in this case, they took a look at the male leaders, male equals, female equals. And what they found was that for males and females, when they were equals, that it was equal, right? Their expectations of sexual interest, when they were, there's a lot of equals there, but the expectations of sexual interest was the same for males when they were put in the equal position as it was for females when they were put in the equal position. There was no difference in the expectation of sexual interest. However, when you put them into a position of power, when you put males in power and then measure their expected sexual interest, and then you put females in power and measure their expected sexual interest, there is still absolutely no difference. And that was a huge, surprising finding. So this was even more close than the previous findings. So again, they didn't report the actual numbers, and I have a huge suspicion that, again, that's the idea that people come to this research with preconceived notions. But basically what they found was that it doesn't matter if you're male, it doesn't matter if you're female, your expectations of sexual interest are the same. And it doesn't matter if you're a male leader or a female leader, leadership, being in a position of power, increases how much you think people are interested in you. Being in a position of power increases how you perceive whether somebody wants you to initiate a sexual relationship. It changes how you perceive that particular situation. So I'm going to leave you with that. We're going to wrap that up next time when we talk about the Me Too movement, when we talk about the implications of the fact that it was the same for both genders, allegedly. But no, the results are not alleged. I just can't pop this picture up without saying allegedly. But anyways, we're going to cover all that next time when we wrap up for real signal detection. And then we're going to move on to our next topic in perception. But other than that, we are done for the day.